they're smart, they're adaptable, they breed really fast. They're just like the ultimate animal on the landscape.
I guess the only comparison is us as a species.
Exactly.
So yeah,
pigs are going to run us out of here.
They're going to be the new dominant species on Earth here pretty soon if we're not careful. This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview travelers, explorers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the best tips and stories from around the world. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. Thanks for tuning back in today. I have a very special guest, someone I met down in Texas. It was very hectic down there, so we didn't get to do the podcast in person. We're doing the next best thing over the internet. So today our special guest is Andrew Austin, wildlife ecologist, and you also have your own podcast called, I don't want to mess it up. Oh shit, I lost it. Wildlife Experience. So hey, down in Texas, we talked a little bit. My friend Seth and I were filming some stuff with you, and dude, you're an interesting guy. You're young, you've got a lot of energy, you love ecology, you love wildlife, and that's what I love too. So first things first, where did you kind of find this passion, man? Because you're like really, really into it.
Man, it's I always want to say, Steve Irwin or Jeff Corwin, some of these wildlife personalities from my childhood, but truthfully, my dad get me out into the woods, when I was 4 or 5 years old, deer hunting and going bass fishing and turkey hunting. I think those were the most profound experiences that got me into it. Just traveling around Texas and hunting in different habitats and stuff. I found myself always staring at the landscape and just always had all these questions about the land and the wildlife. And then Steve Irwin came along, and that just kind of really catapulted me forward.
Yeah, man. Iconic. He was like the man for wildlife. So you have your personal Instagram is super dope. Like, you're always catching crazy stuff, snakes, frogs, fish, whatever you can get your hands on, it seems like. So I believe you call that herping. That's the term I learned down there.
Yeah, right. Herping is that's looking for reptiles and amphibians, right? So herpetology, the study of reptiles and amphibians. And yeah, so herping is going out looking for them. It's kind of like fishing, but it's just reptiles and amphibians.
So I know you were down there when we were at the podcast summit. You were kind of doing your thing, looking for rattlesnakes. That's not something I have any familiar with. What's it like dealing with dangerous animals? Because a lot of people see that and they think, dude, that's insane. Like, I would never ever want to do that. So how, is there a misconception there that a lot of people aren't getting? Like, is it something you can do safely, or is that just like you have to be very careful? How do you approach that?
I've been handling venomous snakes for over a decade now. I have been bitten by a venomous snake. When I was younger, I didn't really have a good mentor. I kind of just learned on my own. Mm-hmm. It is dangerous work, and I've worked a lot with alligators and crocodiles, some of these larger reptiles, and it is dangerous. But, as I've gotten older, I really do downplay the kind of the sensational, look at me doing this dangerous stuff. Because once you truly understand the behavior of these animals, they're really not that bad. Snakes, take venomous snakes, rattlesnakes, if you stay out of their way, generally you're pretty safe. I just, when I have to handle them now, I don't put my hands on them anymore. Like when I was younger, I used to, I wanted to, like Steve Irwin, pick them up and get a feel for them. Now I would just use a snake hook. I don't even put myself in danger anymore, and really anybody can do that. It's just, they are dangerous animals, and they deserve respect, but, I really do downplay the, look how dangerous they are, look at me handle this dangerous animal type vibe. Like when I was younger, I really got sucked into that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's easy to do. It's an adrenaline rush, just like anything else. Like if you were to go skiing or any other extreme sport, there's some adrenaline rush. That's why we all do what we do in the outdoors. Hunting, huge adrenaline rush for when you're doing that stuff. So that's pretty awesome. And, a lot of people are creeped out by reptiles and amphibians, but do they hold any magical places in your heart that are that just makes them special to you? Because I've noticed either someone's very into reptiles and amphibians or they want nothing to do with them. There's kind of no in between.
I think I think the thing is, I used to think I did have a special attachment to them. But honestly, I think the only reason a lot of young naturalists start with reptiles and amphibians is because they're really diverse. There's a ton of species, and you can pick them up. That's the key. You can grab them. With mammals and birds, you can't just go grabbing them, right? I think that's why a lot of young wildlife enthusiasts kind of start with reptiles, and then as I've gotten older, I've branched out to birds. Really just everything. Plants, animals, the whole bit. But yeah, I think that's it. Is just the fact that they're readily observed and captured very easily.
So down in Texas, you have a wide array of these creepy crawlies that people, are often terrified of. What's some of your favorite to catch? Because, they're like, even up here, there's lots of snakes. I see snakes all the time. We've got non-venomous snakes up here in Ohio, garter snakes. We got, hognose, got a bunch of just, non-venomous snakes. But what's kind of like your favorite thing to pick up and play with?
And we have, I live down in Beaumont, so down on the coast, and we have around 30 species of snakes locally, and a couple are really neat. There's one called a mud snake, and it's got a black back. The top is jet black, and the belly is bright red. The contrast is really phenomenal. They have smooth, shiny scales. They don't bite, and so those are probably my favorite to find and actually handle. If coral snakes and rattlesnakes weren't so deadly, not really deadly, they're highly venomous. You leave them alone, they're not deadly. If they were not so venomous, they would be fun to, pick up. But, as far as just handling snakes or any smaller critter, mud snakes, milk snakes, some of the king snakes are a lot of fun to find. You can actually pick them up and look at them closely, and you don't have to worry about going to the hospital if you get bit, which you will get bit most of the time by these non-venomous snakes.
Hey everybody, thanks for checking out this episode. If you feel like you're getting something out of it, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. The Aptitude Outdoors podcast is fully self-funded by me. So if you're digging it, I'm just throwing out a tip jar, and I appreciate you listening. Let's dive right back into this episode.
As a wildlife ecologist, what does that entail? Because there's so many terms out there, and I think people get confused. There's biologists, there's ecologists, there's like conservationists. There's so many different terms. Like, what differentiates you between, say, like someone who works at a park and is a naturalist? Like, what's an ecologist do?
Well, I will say I am a naturalist first. I've always been a naturalist since I was younger, and most of what I've learned about the natural world I learned on my own, not in college, but I really wanted to make money doing ecology. So I did study wildlife ecology. The difference between like a wildlife ecology program versus like just a general bio is wildlife ecology. You're going to learn a lot about how to manage wildlife, conservation biology, the North American model of conservation. It was a big theme in my degree. How we use hunting to conserve wildlife, the policies that go along with it. There's, and then really the biggest part is with the wildlife ecology degree, we learn a lot about plants, because without plants, there's no animals. That's the habitat, that's the food, and knowing how to manage ecosystems and plant communities. That's a big part of it. And that's a big distinction between, a biologist that just works with just say, one group of animals versus an ecologist, which is kind of more well-rounded, knows more, learned more about the different aspects of the ecosystems, and kind of works with both, ecosystems and with, different animal groups kind of collectively. So I think that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the key terms that we talked about a lot at the podcast summit, I think everybody that came on my podcast and probably your podcast talked about this North American model of conservation, which, I have a very basic understanding of, which is essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that basically hunting, taxes on hunting equipment, things like that are funding a lot of the conservation projects in America. But do you have like a more detailed definition that you could explain to people listening, like maybe that makes a little more sense than just like a basic level? Because I think it confuses a lot of people, because I think a lot of people think preservation and conservation are like the same thing, even though they're like drastically different,
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'll try my best.
Yeah.
There are like specific definitions for this, and I can't remember them from college. But the North American model, kind of what separates it is it is a consumptive use model. It is, a sustainable harvest model, like using biology and ecology concepts to be able to harvest wildlife populations in a sustainable way. And while doing so, generating revenue to put back into the conservation of those species that are being harvested. And it works out really well, and one of the biggest parts to me, I think, is it creates a larger group of people that it creates more of an incentive to restore, to conserve our natural resources. If you were to like exclude hunters, say we didn't have the North American model and hunters were excluded from the conservation conversation, you're losing so many people that would want to, see our resources conserved. So I think that's a big part of it. But yeah, I guess the main theme is just the consumptive use model where, we have the excise taxes on guns and ammo. And that generates revenue for wildlife. Every time there's a gun or ammo sale, there's that money goes straight into a federal wildlife restoration fund, goes right back into wildlife, hunting licenses, permits, all that. Collectively, it's a lot of money. A lot of money is generated through this great model that we've come up with where, people that want to harvest wild game, they have to, buy these things. And, so it's done in a very sustainable way, and I think a lot of other places in the world that have the resources to have a model like this would benefit if they did.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there's a lot of people up in arms, that's not a pun, about like how America handles weapons and things like that. And, it's a weird dichotomy because we're using the money that's coming from this to fund wildlife restoration. So I'm sitting here like, buy as many guns as you can and ammo and everything. Like, come on, let's go. Let's save the wildlife, man. And that's what's super important to me. And I think, I've been going to Texas for the last 2 years for the podcast summit. And every time I go down there, I learn, because Texas is its own different animal. And I love coming down there because everybody thinks so differently than the way, things are up here in Ohio. And it's not to say that's a bad thing. It's just Texas, the way Texas runs their wildlife conservation in a way is so different because you've got these ranches and there's not a ton of public land. What do you think about that? Not to say it's good or bad, but like the way that Texas runs it is so much drastically different from the rest of the country. And it's kind of cool to watch because you guys do your own thing, which like Texas is known for, doing your own thing. I like that.
Right. Texas has a lot of good things going for it as far as our conservation, our wildlife management policies and stuff and how we manage our resources. There are a lot of benefits to having, all these large ranches, as long as they're, implementing wildlife management techniques. And we have incentives. We incentivize that. There are you can get ag exempt. You can get tax exemptions by meeting wildlife management criteria. We have a system for that, just to help landowners, manage for wildlife and benefit them financially. I will say that I do wish we had more public land, because it is hard to get access, especially some of the higher quality ranches around the state, to hunt on some of these ranches. It's just, extremely expensive. And which that's not a problem. It's just, I do wish we had more public land. The state it's huge and it's like 98% privately owned. Which is just, I think we could use a little more public land. But it does work out though, there are issues around the bigger cities. Some of these ranches are getting, as they get passed down through the generations to say people like my age, grandkids of these long lasting ranches, and they get, passed down to them. and they don't want to ranch the land. They don't want to keep it, so they sell it to developers and they get subdivided. And that's a problem around like Dallas and Houston and Austin. That's why like the wildlife tax valuation is really important. It can help people and encourage people to keep those lands under agriculture, which benefits wildlife. We do have unique challenges for sure, but I think overall Texas does a really good job. We do have we have a very diverse state ecologically. We have like 9 ecoregions, something like that. You go from the deciduous forest in the east, which is not much different than like Virginia. We get a lot of the same plants and animals as far eastern part of the U.S. And you move west and you hit all these different ecoregions and your transitional zones, and before you know it, you're in the deserts out in West Texas, and it's just it's a lot of diversity here, and we have a lot of special wildlife, and so yeah, it is a good thing that we're doing a pretty decent job of managing it.
And one thing that's super foreign to people up here is the hog problem, which I've been versed in the last 2 years I've been down to Texas. And, I was a little hesitant when we went down there to, do these hog hunts and things like that, because, up here, I'll get like maybe 1 deer a year or something like that, and I just eat it. And that's like basically the extent of my hunting. I try to get a turkey. I haven't been successful yet with that, but I'm going to give her hell this year for sure. And, could you maybe explain to people, I think the only way people can really relate from a northern perspective is maybe the coyote situation. That's about as close as we can get up here, I think, maybe, or carp in the Great Lakes. Like what's the hog situation down there like at a base level? Because a lot of people think you guys just like to fly helicopters and blow them up with stuff and put it on YouTube.
It's bad.
Yeah.
My wildlife policy class in college, all we talked about was how do we manage hogs? Do we do it on a local scale, a federal scale? We had to write papers over this stuff. There's all sorts of literature, especially coming out of A&M. They're trying to figure out the most efficient way to manage hogs. They thought about poison, but then that can a predator eats the dead hog and gets poisoned itself. Stuff like that. But it costs farmers billions of dollars on a national scale every year. The amount of money lost because of hog damage is insane. And then the ecology part is really bad. We have a lot of there's a lot of very sensitive ecosystems out there with rare plants and animals, and hogs just come through, and the way they forage, man, they just tear the landscape up, and it increases erosion. I've seen areas that supported, like rare snakes. Like there's a snake called a pygmy rattlesnake in East Texas, and in areas where they were once common, like you go back and like the land is just so tore up, and these hogs they'll eat small vertebrates like snakes and lizards. So they're having a very direct impact on native wildlife, and they compete for some of the same resources as deer and some of our more preferred game species. And I don't know, it seems like there's no way to really eradicate them. I think eradication is, we're past that now. We're not really thinking about that now. I don't think the goal is keeping them off of more environmentally sensitive areas, because, here in Texas, a lot of our, especially in the eastern part of the state where hogs are, more prevalent, we've been chopped up by croplands and urban developments. We have like these just small little wildlife management areas that are conserving a little piece of, the original Texas landscape. And then, when hogs go in there, they degrade it, those little areas. So keeping hogs out of areas like that are really ecologically sensitive is really important and doable, and, those guys are doing those helicopter hunts, killing thousands at a time. That's definitely saving, farmers and ranchers, a lot of money. So, yeah, I mean, it's bad. I live out here in the woods, and when I was younger, we never had hogs, and now they're in the front yard. They're just growing exponentially. I think they can breed at like 6 months old, and so a female can have I think up to 2 litters a year or something. Like their population growth rate is it's insanity. But yeah, it's a problem for sure.
Yeah, I didn't realize, because last year we were at a different ranch down at the summit, and there wasn't a lot of, sign of pigs, because it was a fairly small place. And this year, right outside the front door of the lodge, or the back door of the lodge, there's this big lake, and the whole shoreline was just hog footprints. And I was like, okay, now this makes sense to me. It was like a hog wallow, I guess. It was just, that was my first real experience seeing that, and I was like, okay, I totally understand now. And the wild thing is, though, was down there for, 4 or 5 days. I never saw a hog. I didn't see a single hog. Yeah, incredibly smart. And they breed super fast, and it's just wild. So, I think there's no comparison up here, and like, God forbid they ever got up here, because that's all we have is crops up here where I live. It would just be decimation.
Well, yeah, I think they are moving north. They're such a generalist. They're the great example of how generalist species are just superior to everything else. They can live in practically any habitat. They're omnivores. They eat everything, plants and animals. They're smart. They're adaptable. They breed really fast. They're just like the ultimate animal on the landscape.
I guess the only comparison is us as a species.
Exactly.
So yeah,
pigs are going to run us out of here.
They're going to be the new dominant species on Earth here pretty soon if we're not careful. So something that we talked about in detail, kind of when we were down there, was this newer generation of people, you and I and everyone that was down there, we're kind of having to take the reins on this whole, why hunting is important thing and all that stuff, like all the stuff you hear every day. But like, we talked about how important it was. And I don't know if it's different for you down there. I don't know a lot of people my age that are into hunting, and I got into hunting as a conservationist. Like, that's where I did a 180. I used to be like ambitious college kid. I was going for like environmental anthropology and all this stuff, and it was everything that we were taught was, you don't eat meat because it's this and that, and you want to grow your own food and all this stuff, which makes sense. But at the end of the day, it just didn't click with me on a personal level. And I was like, hunting is literally the most ecologically friendly way to get your own food, in my opinion, because you're not using that much resources. Like, if you buy a bow or a gun, that's going to last you probably your life. And then, if you're conservative and you're not a terrible shot, the ammo isn't going to be that expensive. So you're like using this one little resource, weapon, whatever you want to call it. You're killing 1 to however many animals you need to eat a year if you're living that lifestyle. And I just don't see a lot of people doing it. Is it different down there in Texas? Like, are a lot of people your age or younger even like into hunting? Because I don't know if it's just my own inner circle. I know there's people up here that do it. I just don't know that many of them. And I'm always trying to get my friends to just get into it, even at a base level, try it once or twice. And
right. Texas is the hunting culture is big here across the board. If you go into the urban areas, in the bigger cities, there are a lot of people that don't hunt. They don't really think much of it, really. They're just so disconnected from the outdoors in general. But yeah, I grew up in a small town, and hunting is, everybody loves to hunt. It's very popular. And it's well accepted across the board. Not a lot of people that I know in the kind of hunting community around here, they don't think much about conservation. They just hunt because it's part of their culture, and it's what they grew up with, and it's a social event. Duck hunting is really big down here on the coast, and it's getting out there with your buddies and having a good time. Harvesting some ducks, and it's great. But it's not as meeting people like you and other people that came to it from kind of a different angle. From conservation first angle. It is a little different, I guess I did start, I was hunting when I was really, really young. I hunted my whole life. And then when I started learning about, kind of our wildlife problems are, we are losing species rapidly around the world. It's not, every country is different. Here in North America, a lot of species are more common now, but, when I was learning about just conservation in general, I was like, why am I hunting? This isn't good. This is before college, and I was like, why would I contribute to the wildlife crisis, that we're sort of in? And I don't mean to sound like an alarmist. We are in a crisis. Like across the board, we're losing species rapidly because of habitat loss. It's just terrible. But then I went to college and I learned about the North American model. And I was like, well, actually, it turns out, my hunting practice that I've been doing my whole life, it's consistent with, who I am as a naturalist and a conservationist. And once I connected those dots, I just became really passionate about, spreading the word that hunting is good, and you don't have to, be a hunter to be a great conservationist, but you should at least support it. You should support hunting.
Life is hard, and we're out here doing larger-than-life things, whether it's pushing ourselves physically in the outdoors or mentally at work or in the podcast studio. Absolute Aid is here to help you focus, recover, and stay calm during your most intense moments. Absolute Aid, created by nature, made with science, for those who seek to do more.
Well, it's weird because the further you dive down the rabbit hole of conservation, you start to think about shit like zoning. Like you would never think about this. Like how much of America is zoned for single family homes only or something, and not multi-generational living or like complexes where many people can live. So especially what I noticed out in Texas and even where I live, where it's very rural and very, flat in a lot of places, or relatively flat. These cities there's not a lot of tall buildings. They just spread out and out and out and out. And every time that happens, you're just eating up wildlife habitat. You're just bulldozing it over. And it's just you start to take notice of things that you never thought you would care about. I don't care about zoning now even, but you think about this and you're like, oh my God, it's so complex. Do you get overwhelmed? Because I know I do. I would sit here some days just what the hell are we going to do, man? It seems so hopeless that sometimes, but.
I do. That's why I just moved back home. I was living in Houston in a suburb, and I found it extremely depressing.
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty happy person. I don't really get super depressed or anything, but it is hard to be optimistic, in 50 years, when we're old, we're going to look back to these days and be like, wow, we had so much wildlife.
I know, dude.
So I appreciate what we have in the moment, because you can still go to the Amazon and find an undescribed animal. There's still undiscovered wildlife in the world. But there's probably not much we can do to stop the urban sprawl, and, the human population keeps growing, and but it's really not even just a population problem. It's a mismanagement problem. We could fit a lot of people into smaller areas, like you're saying, building up rather than out. But it's just the way our society is just going to function the way it's going to function. And as conservationists, we got to take what we can get and support, hunting and fishing, and organizations like the Nature Conservancy, which buys land. Buying land is the most important thing in my mind when it comes to, keeping our hunting heritage and our wildlife resources. Because without hunting and without our amazing North American wildlife, what's life without, our North American fauna and our great ecosystem? It's just we lose our identity. This is who we are. We came to this land, and we have all these amazing ecosystems that we can live off of. And I always wish I could have gone back 300 years and see what it was like before settlement. But, we still have some amazing stuff that, represents what North America was like before. And we need to, spread the word about it and fight to conserve it.
Yeah. And I read stories here locally in where I'm at in the Toledo, Ohio area. And there's a river right outside this building I'm in right now. It's 5 minutes up the road. I could walk there if I wanted to. And there's historical documents. There's this fort. It's one of those historical forts you can go and visit and pay $10 and get in and walk around and all that crap. And there's historical documents I've read where it's there used to be so many sturgeon in the river that you could walk across the river on sturgeon. There's probably an exaggeration there, but it's showing the numbers of these gigantic fish. And now all I see is reintroduction. I've never seen a sturgeon in the river ever. I mean, I know they're there, but it's like they're not common. But it's just so frustrating because, you know, someone like you or me, that's all we care about. We just love wildlife. We love, you know, the outdoors. We love nature. And then there's like so many people who don't interact with us in that way, and they don't understand. Like, a lot of the people I know are more concerned with like buying clothes and stuff. And it's a hard line because, you know, as someone who podcasts and someone who does like video, kind of hypocritical on my end because like how much junk that's super terrible for the environment is in these microphones and cameras and all this stuff. But it's like, how do we balance that in this day-to-day life? Because I started asking myself, like, is buying this thing going to make my life any better, or is it just going to like degrade the ecosystem further? You know, and it's a hard line when you can wake up and buy anything online for cheap as hell, get it sent right to your house in 5 pounds of plastic wrap. You know, so right. I don't know, man. It's very frustrating.
I used to think the same stuff. You know, I did buy into the, you know, reduce my carbon footprint thing, but truthfully, I think it's a load of shit at this point. I respect people that want to do that, but you know, when it comes to that sort of stuff, that can't be put on like individuals. That's like, you know, industrial scale stuff. Mm-hmm. As far as, you know, individual actions, to me, it just supporting conservation in some way is so much more valuable than, you know, like, oh, I've recycled all my plastic and I reduced my carbon footprint by 60%. I think the actual net result of your actions is very little positive result. I think it's mostly just to make yourself feel good. And you know, I support people that are environmentally minded like that, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions on how you can actually make a difference in the world and benefit biodiversity and you know, the planet overall. And I think, you know, thinking more about ecosystems directly can be very beneficial. That, you know, healthy ecosystems provide us with ecosystem services, clean air, clean water, wildlife, the list goes, aesthetic value, recreational value, the list goes on. And I think focusing on that is key. I don't know. It's complicated, the world we live in, because I like comfort too. I don't want to live in a hut in the woods. You know, perhaps I could do that, but
I'll say it sounds pretty damn good to me, dude. I don't know what you're talking about.
Maybe up in the mountains somewhere where it's nice and cool. I live in the swamps, and the mosquitoes would carry my ass away.
Well,
it is a complex world we live in. You know, we live a comfortable life because of the Industrial Revolution, which happens to also be the reason why we have lost so much biodiversity. So when you see a place like the Amazon, which is kind of undergoing a similar process that North America went under, you know, they're trying to tame their land. You know, they're burning forests, they're creating ag fields, they're wanting to graze their cattle and plant crops and all this. A lot of that is just people. I mean, they want to live sophisticated lives too, like we get to live here in America. But from our angle, all we think about is all the wildlife, and like we're just like, man, y'all are going to end up like us without most of your wildlife left over. Yeah. So it's complicated. You know, you got to take care of people first. Generally in conservation, you got to take care of people to take care of animals in certain areas. And it's just a hard balance to strike, you know?
Well, and you know, something that we'll just step back. You and I both know Chester Moore. He's been on my podcast 2 or 3 times now. And, you know, he gave this presentation, which I'll put a link to if anybody wants to watch or listen to it, you know. And he made a really good point to me, and I listen to Chester a lot. You know, he's been in this game for probably both of our lifetimes combined. You know, He's been doing maybe not that long. Sorry, Chester, but it's been a while. And you know, I think he said at the conference that stood out to me is like, if we all can use what we have, like whether it's our voice, whatever, like whether you have 5 downloads or 5,000 or 5 million downloads of your podcast, you can use your voice to at least educate people. And like, I think that's the only thing I have to offer, because I'm not really that good at much. Like I don't have an ecology degree. I'll never go back to college at this point in my life, I don't think, because like, you know, all I have is this passion for the outdoors and a microphone. And like, I'm pretty okay at microphones and cameras and stuff like that. So storytelling is what I feel like I'm okay at. And I think, you know, you have a podcast, you have a pretty big social media following, and using our voices to educate, I think, is the most important thing, because, not everyone's going to sit down and read a 500-page ecology book. You or I would, but that's like, oh, cool, that's interesting, but not the average person is. So what's your vision? If you could have a vision to correct things and make them better for wildlife, like, what would you do? Like, what would your solution be? I know that's a huge question, but
that's a great question.
But you get to choose. You're like the president of the world, and you're like, I, Andrew Austin, declare wildlife shall be saved by this.
Man, I would, like I was saying earlier, you got to find a balance. You got to benefit people, and obviously I would have very strong policies to expand our federal lands. That would be the biggest thing. Buy more land and restore more ecosystems, because we do have there's a lot of land out there it's under conservation, but it's not being managed. We have to burn prairies to get them back to their original condition. To get out to burn down the woody plants that choke out native grasses. Like, a lot of our grasslands evolved under fire pressure, and under grazing pressure, and man, if I had to course correct at this point, that is a tough question.
I've been thinking about this one.
That's a good one, man. I love trying to come up with questions like this for my guests, and now I'm a victim of it. If I was the president of the United States, man, I would try to be like Teddy Roosevelt. I would really lean heavy on conservation, obviously, and prop up the North American model, diversify the North American model. It's great how it is, but we're not tapping into every user of the natural world. Let's get bird watchers in on the North American model, and herpetologists, people that like to find reptiles, and really diversify those funds, and not just be so heavy on the consumptive user, but, get the non-consumptive user in, which, there's pushback. I think that has been tried before or talked about, but there's pushback from the non-consumptive communities, hikers and such. But yeah, I think stuff like that, some of our environmental policies, like the Clean Water Act, some of that stuff can be strengthened even further. Our wetlands are very valuable for wildlife, for clean water. And, every year, depending on who's, president, it gets, the definition of a wetland changes on a jurisdictional level. And that's what I deal with in my career. Is we'll be doing one report, and then we have a change in administration, and then we have to change everything up, because what was a wetland before isn't a wetland now. And, really strengthening stuff like that is important. Protecting our wetlands, our endangered species, threatened and endangered species, really important. Putting a lot of money into getting bison back on their original historic lands, across the Great Plains, restoring the Great Plains and getting bison back on the landscape. But that's really hard, because you got cattle on the landscape now, and a lot of cattle ranchers find bison to be a direct threat to their way of living, and you can't blame them. There's a whole list of things you could do. It's just, you got to deal with people at some point, and that's the hard thing. So you got to find rational middle ground solutions. You can't just be extreme and try to push anything too strong. I think coming to middle ground solutions is really key going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I both talked to Gray Thornton, on our podcast, which was, a great experience. He's been in, conservation for a long time, and he's dealt with some really heavy hitting people, and he's had to go to Congress and things like that to fight for rights of animals. I can't even imagine myself doing that. That's amazing. And that's essentially what he said is it's not a place issue. It's a people issue. We have to deal with people, and it's a very complex world we live in, because it would be like if someone came up to you and was like, Andrew, guess what? You can't live in your house anymore because of this animal that lives in your backyard. Sorry, dude, you would not be happy about it. You own the house. It costs you a lot of money to maintain and live there. So I think what you're saying is we all have to be rational, which human beings are not known for being rational all the time. That's kind of like our thing. We're glorified animals ourselves. And, that's the hardest part, is speaking rationally to people who don't want to listen. So I think the best thing we can do, on my perspective, is get the people who are passionate to learn how to be rational, because you can't win a fight by just being bullheaded all the time. Like, sometimes you got to give a little bit. And something that is tough is converting people to that mindset. And I would say one of my biggest accomplishments, people always want me to list accomplishments when you try for a new job, or they talk, you give presentations, which I'm sure as an ecologist, you give presentations and stuff all the time to public and things like that. Everybody wants to oh, what's your biggest accomplishment? And to me, it's not big adventures. It's not doing these hard physical trials. It's I got my friend who was really nervous and was didn't want to try hunting. I got him to eased him into it, and I got him to get a bow, and we started shooting bow at this archery range, and he had so much fun. And I was like, dude, just come with me one time. You don't have to bring your bow, just sit with me and we'll hunt together, and you can just get the experience. And he goes, all right. And then he took his hunter course, and he went with me, and I watched him shoot at his first year. Completely missed. It was a terrible shot. But his face when it happened was the best thing I've ever seen. And now he's every year he's dude, we got to get ready for hunting season. Biggest accomplishment of my life is stuff like that. Took a friend fishing before we would ever move. That stuff to me, because now they care. Now there's skin in the game and they're all about it. And I think we don't all have to change the world in a huge way. Not everybody's going to be in Congress changing the world. It's just a fact. There's 8 billion people on the earth. We're not all going to be multimillionaires. You know what I mean? So what are some of your, goals that you have as an ecologist? What are you working on right now that you're trying to change?
Man, my biggest thing is trying to bridge the gap between the non-consumptive users and hunters, and the consumptive users. Mm-hmm. I am in a unique position. I hang out with birders and herpers and these, people that are rather anti-hunting, a lot of them, and I'm also, I am in the hunting community as well. And so I'm a part of both communities sort of. And I think, and Chester's kind of the same way. He dabbles in both communities as well. I think that's why me and him clicked early on. I've known him for 7-8 years now. And bridging the gap, making people realize that we're all in this together. We all care about natural resources. A lot of the non-consumptive users, the anti-hunters, they simply don't know what hunting is for conservation here in North America and how it is implemented under our model here. And, I have plenty of examples, personal examples, friends I've had that I've explained to them what the North American model is. And they were fully supportive. They're not interested in killing an animal themselves. That's perfectly okay. It's not for everybody. It's, it's emotional for me. I don't like to kill anything, but I have a deep connection. It gives me a deeper connection to the ecosystems when I do harvest and eat an animal. So it's well worth it in the end. But, and also, a lot of hunters, I want to get more hunters thinking more like a naturalist, and thinking of themselves as a conservationist and, being very pro environment, be very, interested in conserving natural resources. A lot of them just kind of hunt, it's whatever. And, the hard part here is it gets real, people are very political now. And that's another thing I try to cut straight through people's politics and just help make people realize that one thing we can all agree on is conserving wildlife in their habitats benefits us all, no matter what group you're from. That should never be political. That's something we should all be supportive of, both sides of it.
And, I started this podcast as someone who came from backpacking. I'd never hunted when I started this podcast. It was just all brand new to me. I literally started this to drink beer with my friends and talk about cool outdoor stuff. That's why I started this podcast. And, now that I've kind of narrowed down and found what I really think is important to me, bridging that gap, I think, is very important, because a lot of the the outdoor recreationist community just thinks hunters are terrible people. And, you know, I've had people come up and be like, they didn't know I was into this at all. It was like unassuming. I was just like a backpacking guy. And I was like, you know, I hate to break it to you, but like they're funding a lot of this stuff. Like, you know, like you don't have to, in like hunting, you don't have to hunt yourself, but like hunters are funding a lot of this conservation work that's going on. Like when you go backpacking, you're spending money on backpacks and that money's not going to anything but like the company. Like, you know, those companies may spend money on preservation and conservation, but not nearly as much as, you know, people buying ammo, which right now is a lot. You can't even find ammo hardly anymore, which, you know, whatever. And it doesn't have to be political. I've never made this show political. I've never made any political stances on this show. It's not, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to change minds about conservation and you know, the outdoors in general, getting people involved in the outdoors. And so speaking of podcasts, you have your own podcast. What was your vision for starting this? Because like, as we both know, it's a ton of work, but it's so much fun. Like, why did you want to get involved in the podcasting world?
Well, I went on a friend's podcast and had so much fun. So I was like, I got to start my own.
Yep.
And you know, I didn't hate, like when I went and listened back to it, I was really nervous, you know, like when you first start listening to yourself, it's really weird. And it's like, you know, it's not that bad. You know, I think I can possibly do this. I don't know if people will listen, but then I was like, you know, this could be a cool networking opportunity. You know, I'm going to learn a lot myself. I can, you know, get a good conservation message in, hopefully in each episode, and that people can take with them. And, you know, ask interesting questions like the one you stumped me with earlier. What would I do if I could change the system that we're in? I like asking questions like that to people that are far wiser than me, and seeing what they have to say, and just having a positive, you know, dialogue about conservation. But also, I like just getting to know people. You know, I like people a lot. As much as I hate society, I love people. You know, people are really fantastic, and getting to know people in the wildlife world from different backgrounds. You know, biologists, hunters, fishermen. You know, birders, herpers, all these people that have anything to do with wildlife, and kind of, you know, getting to know how they got into it and some of their cool experiences they've had. And I think that just through listening to that, I think people can be inspired. You know, I don't think to be a successful sort of, I guess, activist, maybe that's the wrong word. I'm not trying to be an activist, I guess. You know, but to affect change or to change minds, a lot of it is just through inspiration, not by telling them to do this or that. It's just by showing them how much fun it is and how cool it is. And so when I ask questions to interesting people, I'm kind of trying to have that in the back of my mind. I'm like, you know, what's going to get people to for that light to pop up in their head? Like, oh, this is kind of cool. I want to learn about this, you know, without being too preachy. You know, I think being preachy can be, I know how I get inspired is not through being preached at. I like to be organically inspired by something, you know, and so that's kind of how I go about it, I guess, you know, and it, no, I have fun with it. I don't really, I mean, I hope people listen, but obviously it's a very tough space to operate in, this podcasting world. And people that come to it with a following already, or, you know, they're always going to succeed. But if 10 people listen and they change their mind, great. That's a success to me. And I had fun and I got to learn and meet cool people.
That's exactly how I feel, dude. I mean, I say this all the time and people are probably sick of hearing it, but like when I started this, I never imagined anyone would listen to it. Like, I'm still blown away that people are listening to this podcast after 2 years of me just rambling on about nature. Like, it's absolutely mind blowing to me. And like, my favorite part of this whole thing is like, I got to meet you, dude. Like, it would have never happened if I never started this podcast. And like, yeah, it's continually networking with people who have a like-minded vision. And like, we don't, like, not all of my guests I agree with, or like, you know, we're not always on the 100% on the same page, but those are the discussions we need to have, you know, like we have to have these discussions that are hard sometimes, because that's where change is made, is like in those hard conversations, you know. And you could say all the motivational quotes about change is made in hard conversation, all this stuff, like whatever you want to say. But it's true because that's where the middle ground that you were just talking about earlier is met. Like the reason, like you could be the most left wing or right wing and you can have whatever opinion you want on anything. But if all we're talking about is wildlife, the politics don't matter. Do you care about wildlife or not? That's all that matters in this arena. And like, you know, I think what you're doing is really awesome. And I'm super glad you started a podcast because I'm not an ecologist. I don't have a background in the really cool nitpicking stuff to know about all the cool animals. I'm just a guy that loves it to death. You know, like I would rather be out in the backwoods of Texas with you picking up shit that I don't want to touch, like squirmy shit, than anything on earth, man. Like if I could go into the woods right now and just like camp for a month straight, that's what I would love to do. I would just love nothing more than that. And that passion comes through when you talk. Like you are so passionate about what you do, and we need that. That's what's going to make change in the long run. So, you know, what's in the long term, you know, what's your goal? Like, what are you trying to do? You don't always have to have this, you know, I want to get 1 million downloads. That doesn't matter. What's the end goal with the podcast, like 5 years down the road?
I don't know, man. I kind of live life year by year, you know. I do make goals, but they're usually limited to like a year, which seems kind of silly. But the only long-term goal I ever had was to become a biologist. And it almost didn't happen because I suck at school, but I grinded it out. I hated school, but I made it through somehow. But anyway, 5 years from now, you know, if I can get to where I can reach out to a guy like, you know, I don't know, this is high caliber, but if you can have a podcast where you can reach out to a guy like Steve Rinella and he would consider coming on, that's a success to me. No matter. Like, I don't know what the threshold of followers is for a guy like him to waste his time on a little podcast, but it's kind of a selfish thing. That's my selfish goal. I would want to have enough podcasting clout to where I can reach out to people like that. Cause it's hard. You know, there's people I like want to talk to you so bad, but you know, if you don't have a big following or, you know, you're just one in 1,000 people that reached out to them trying to get them on their podcast, and standing out just enough to where I can reach out to higher caliber people in the conservation world would be really cool. Because I don't know, it's just, I like meeting people like that and having conversations. But you know, I'm also, one thing that's really important to me on here, and you're probably the same way, is I like having, you know, regular people like me on, you know, it's just people that I'm friends with on Instagram that, nobody really, like, I'll ask some people, I'm like, you want to come on my podcast? And they're like shocked. They're like, why would you want me to come on a podcast? Like, cause I think you might, I see your work and I think you might have something valuable to share with people, you know? So that's really important to me. It's not just going for the higher status people. Really just, diversity of people from all different backgrounds, you know, people from different parts of the world, just, meeting different people and having interesting conversations. And, that's really all I ask out of it. You know, that's my overarching goal.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I love it when people are like you come on because you have like really good things to talk about. And the clout thing with podcasts, whatever you want to call it, it's whatever to me. You know, I got the guests that we've had on the podcast this year at the conference. I was like, I do not know how I'm here right now. Like, I don't know what I did to be here, but it doesn't make any sense to me. Every time Derek invites me back down there, I'm like, I don't know what I did, dude. Like, I don't know why you keep inviting me back. Like, I do not deserve to be here. Like, this is so amazing. So that's a good way to be. And I think, you know, I'm just glad that I can talk to people, and if I've changed one person's mind, I'm totally happy with that. But it looks like we are running close to an hour here. So, you know, it's late for you. You have a full-time job. I have a full-time job. I don't want to keep you all night. But like, before we take off, where can people find your podcast, first off, Wildlife Experience, and where can they learn more about you in general, like all your social media stuff, because you post great stuff all the time. And I follow it. I think it's awesome.
That's awesome, man. I really appreciate that. I'm on Instagram. My personal is at the Texas Naturalist. The Texas Naturalist. Sounds very egotistical, but it just sounds better than Texas Naturalist. Anyway, so yeah, I post a lot of my adventures on there, hunting, fishing, looking for snakes. It's a lot of wildlife photography. Sometimes I'll try to add a meaningful caption about the ecology of whatever I was looking for. So yeah, I have an Instagram for my podcast. It's _wildlife_experience. And then on Spotify, you can find me at The Wildlife Experience, and on Apple Podcast. I have about 24 episodes now, which is, it's not a lot, but, we're getting started. Still, it's a big learning experience for me. I feel very comfortable getting interviewed, but becoming a good interviewer, it's a whole nother ballgame, so a little rough at first, but I think I'm getting better. And hopefully it's digestible for people. That's about it. I mainly I post on my personal Instagram. So if you follow me there, you'll get all my adventures, and I'll post about the podcast there and everything I'm up to.
Yeah, you, me, and my buddy Seth that was down there in Texas. We're all just walking around with their 600mm lenses all day long, taking pictures of stuff, dude. I love wildlife photography almost as much, maybe a little bit more than I love hunting. It's just like all the thrill of hunting, but nothing has to die. It's just like yesterday I was taking pictures of wild turkeys, and I was like, my heart got racing just the same as if I had a shotgun in my hand, dude. I absolutely loved it, because if you screw up still, they're still going to run away and you're not going to get a picture. So
that's what I tell my hunting buddies, in the off season, get a camera and you can chase wildlife the same way. And you take home a badass picture, it feels really cool.
And you learn more about what they're doing for the next hunting season. Yeah.
Exactly.
So Andrew, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. I can't wait to hopefully see you next year at the podcast summit and get to hang out again.
Hey man, thanks so much.